Nice. Without further ado, let's get to our evening. So I'm going to first tell you how our evening is going to go, and then I'm going to have our guests introduce themselves. So we basically have kind of 90 minutes together inside of this conversation, and then a few minutes at the end to just talk about Exploration Center. The 90 minutes is like this. We're going to do self-introductions and talk a little bit about permaculture and education, and I'd love to hear you just touch on, your own lens on the relationship between the two, and particularly in this K-8, the youth side of the equation, and how you see permaculture principles, school development, programming, curriculum design weaving together inside of a sustainable world, and hopefully one that we all love being inside of. And so that'll be the first 30 minutes. And then, thank you! Surprise guest. And then we're going to have 30 minutes of a conversation between them where Brandy's going to facilitate a dialogue and pick apart some of the stuff that these guys think they know from earlier when they introduced themselves. And let's all be surprised together, right? Just roll with it. And then we're going to do a 30-minute Q&A. And so we'll pass this around, and you guys can ask your questions. And we'll just have a conversation as a community. Does that all make sense and sound good? Okay. Surprise guest. So I knew that to get your listening perked up, we would need like a really cool hook. And so I have a friend named Hannah who's an amazing poet. And I asked her to come tonight and share a piece with us. And she's just reminded me that I asked her to come and share that piece with us. No sleep for 6 days. Hannah, will you please come share your piece? Thank you. Please welcome Hannah Berry. Wherever you like.
Hello. So I'm Hannah, and the other day Jason asked me to share something. I'm like, I don't really have anything strictly about education or permaculture yet. That's coming. But I do have this piece that I wrote when I was in high school. I guess I wrote it, 5 years ago now. And it was kind of about being an introvert in a not very introverted environment. So being in school and kind of struggling through that on my own. So I thought he thought that would be appropriate for me to do. So I'm going to share that with you now. This is a poem for the quiet ones. The ones who know being alone is different than being lonely. The thinkers. And the doers, because we get stuff done. Just think before we speak, think before we act, maybe overthink, and find every single possible problem and every possible solution. We are the map makers circumnavigating our minds before we travel the world. We are not shy. That fear of social judgment transcends all boundaries, from social butterflies to content cocoons. Living inside yourself does not mean you beat yourself up from the inside out. Being quiet and being silent are two very different things. The world is built around human interaction. Everyone's lives intertwine. We're all caught in worldwide webs and internets that strangle the you out of YouTube, forcing us to constantly compare our full-length movies to everyone else's highlight reel posted on their page of www.lookatme.com. Connection is the only human capacity that we are trying to increase. Everyone needs to be loved. Everyone needs to be together sometimes, but there are times I'd rather just have the book part of Facebook, without faces plastered on my walls, constantly staring me down, taunting me with made-up eyes and made-up personalities. I don't want to be Instagrammed with pictures of coffee cups and hipster selfies, hashtag I don't care. All that matters to me is the next time I see you isn't on an iPhone, and we have more to talk about than Snapchats leading to snap judgments, or how one tweet ruined that bird's reputation. But this is also a poem for the ones who are truly Pinterested in what we have to say, who will ask FM me to my face how my day was, who don't mind listening to the quiet for a while if it means they will find a friend. I am grateful for the ones that make my head spin, but at the same time keep me steady enough not to tip over. I am grateful for the ones who spin me so hard I tumble to the ground, but then help me back to my feet. I am even grateful for the ones who knock me down flat, thinking I won't have the guts to get back up on my own, because sometimes I choose to move at the speed of Internet Explorer instead of Google Chrome, but they are wrong. They are the reason I stand back up, the reason I am standing here. I won't let anyone else's iCloud rain on my parade. Maybe this isn't just for the quiet ones. It's for the quiet in each of us. There is nothing wrong with wanting to unplug from the constant white noise and just listen to the space between. Thank you.
And if people want to learn more about your poetry, is there a place that they can do so? Reach out to me later, I can help you with that. Please welcome Mark Lakeman, Starhawk, Brandy Gallagher. So we'll just go 10 minutes each, and please, as we discussed. Yeah. And you'll need your microphones. Okay.
I can't see whether or not there's a button on here.
Is the mic on?
They're all live now.
Okay.
You're not being amplified, it's just for the live stream.
Okay, thank you. Well, introducing myself, I think I talk a lot, but I don't really like talking about myself. So I use the word we a lot. And I guess I've realized lately that I do that because I'm kind of tired just being an I, and I really desperately want to be a we. I strongly identify with my friends. I love them. I kind of love them so much that I'm terrified at the same time at how much I feel. I don't know, maybe terrified of rejection, which would hurt so much because I identify so much with them, and so much with family and every scale of community. And I think as I realize that, I've also come to realize that is also I. Like it's a larger scale of self. I don't know. I mean, we're going to be talking about permaculture here. I think that the impetus of permaculture that's so attractive to me, that I identify with, and I'm seeing in this revelation around we being I, is this urge toward mutuality or mutualism. And the more that I participate in the communities of mutuality and of revolutionizing education into action, I think it continues to unfold for me. I feel like I'm learning all the time. You kind of get to the point in this process where stuff is just unfolding. I think it helps, to be working with permaculture principles, because it helps you to be reading your own life experience and to be understanding, as you get healthier, why it is that it's happening. But I just have a difficult time talking about me separate from the experiences that I'm participating so much in as a we. So, all that said, I'm working in many different capacities, in different places, moving around a lot, but mostly based in Portland, Oregon. Working in different organizational structures that are focused on placemaking, kind of bringing placemaking into the culture of permaculture. I love placemaking because it integrates. It brings people together who feel that they might have separate pieces, bringing them together into to work together as wholes to re-experience a sense of we coming out of I guess. So we take streets, we turn them into public squares, we work with homeless people to engender villages, even if we're just building out of trash. And it turns out to be a spectacular way forward, not just to help people be safe and warm at night and safe from harm, but also a way for the rest of us to learn what a village truly consists of. Like, in the best case, the best homeless village that I've helped to create, I feel that I've, over the span of the last decade or so, been able to watch the regeneration of the essential, sort of settlement patterns of human culture playing out before our eyes, in which these homeless people have been able to settle in a place and kind of alchemize whatever they could find in their environment, whatever they could gather, and create a more whole village program with a more full spectrum experience of community than the rest of us who are housed in neighborhoods, most of us will ever experience. And going deeper and deeper into this work, I'm learning what it is that I'm really experiencing. Like with homeless people, they'll create a fuller spectrum program and more ways to access and participate than we get to in neighborhoods that basically are just really, let's face it, expressions of a developer's set of priorities and objectives. Yes, we live in developments, we don't live in villages, but if we help a few homeless people to create a village, we get to see what it actually means to live in human habitat. So that's part of my work. I think the beautiful, we've sort of been tricked in a way, and I get to sort of learn more about this trick. We've been told that if we don't act out of our own self-interest all of the time, out of a self-absorption where we just dream on our own behalf and only collect money for ourselves, occasionally giving a little bit of it away to support a cause or feel better about ourselves, if we don't do that, then we're endangering ourselves. But what I'm finding in working with these lovely people that I get to associate with and all the people in our projects is that there's a beautiful grand return for this outwardness toward the larger scale of self. And that is a healing effect that you cannot possibly meditate yourself towards completely in the same way as really coming into direct creative contact with all of these other personalities as they are also healing too. So I don't know, I hope that this makes a bit of sense. It's all very practical and very grounded, and at the same time it's so grounded that sometimes we dare to break the law, and we do it because we know that we will change that law, and the politicians will stand with us and change the law voluntarily so that new conditions are created for more things to emerge and happen in this time of desperation and urgency. So, sometimes we're working as a nonprofit, sometimes we're working as a simple so-called for-profit, sometimes, my favorite way of working is extremely anarchistic, where you can look people in the eyes and you know what you mean, and you don't need guidelines and rules and codes because you have such affinity with each other. And that's the best of anarchy, right? Self-regulating patterns of mutually held values that propel you forward with a minimum of deliberation and a maximum of action. That's the sexiest way. So, yeah. Anyway, I think I'll pass it on now to Star.
I think maybe I should have introduced you and you introduced me, because you're not going to stand up there and say about yourself, I'm a really amazing, creative, visionary architect who's done some of the most imaginative, out-of-the-box work around community development and transformation that I see happening around the world. So, awesome. Myself, I kind of started off as a simple witch, which I came to out of that spiritual search in the 70s for something that actually spoke to my real experiences of when I felt most alive, most connected, most attuned to something deeper and broader and wider than my personal self. And for me, that was in nature, that was in deep connection with other human beings. And when I was in college in my first year doing an anthropology project on witches, I discovered that there actually were real witches. They weren't like with pointy hats and broomsticks, at least not most of the time. But they were people who were following what they said was the old indigenous, earth-based spiritual traditions from Europe, from before Christianity came in. And if you go back even further than that, from the Middle East. And that they were centered on a goddess. For me, that was kind of like, wow. I never thought about the sacred, the divine being seen as female. I grew up Jewish, and God was always supposed to like not be corporeal at all, but was always referred to as he. And all the people who had any kind of authority or status in the religion in that era, in the 50s and early 60s, were all men. It was really kind of beyond my comprehension to think about even a woman rabbi at that point. So I was quite taken with this idea, and we began studying and training, and then over the next few years it became important for me as the feminist movement, the second wave, kind of got going, to see that this was actually deeply connected with women's sense of ourselves and sense of empowerment. That the way that we see God and the way that we see the structure of the world and the spiritual world reflects the way we see value in other human beings. I got very involved in feminist movements, and I'd always been, since high school, kind of a political activist since the days of the Vietnam War. And they kind of came together with the idea of feminist spirituality. And there started to be a movement of those of us who were exploring this. Some women were doing that within the Christian church or the Jewish tradition and pushing for things like women priests and ministers and women rabbis. And some of us were kind of out of the box. I thought about being a rabbi, thought long and hard about it, and then one day I realized if I were a rabbi, it would mean sitting in synagogue, whereas if I were a witch, it would mean dancing naked around the fire at the beach. So for many decades, I was writing about that, and in some ways, I think of myself primarily as a writer. I wrote a book called The Spiral Dance, about the rebirth of the ancient religion of the great goddess. And I wrote many other books, and practicing, and both teaching ritual and magic and consciousness change, and also being an activist. Sometime in the 80s, a friend of mine took a permaculture design course and began talking to me about it. And I got very excited about what I was hearing, because it seemed to me she was talking about the how-to part of the earth being sacred. We can sing about it, chant about it, meditate about it, but to be able to actually take a piece of damaged, toxic ground and bring it back to health, that was a whole other level of empowerment. So I got very excited by that and began reading and learning about it. And a lot of that went into another book I wrote called The Fifth Sacred Thing, which is it's a visionary novel set in the future. And part of it envisions in Northern California this beautiful eco-feminist, diverse, balanced, sexy, wild, beautiful culture. And then Southern California, I think it kind of anticipated Trump and his friends. It's become racist and sexist and militarist. And the story really centers around what happens when the Southlands invade the North. So part of me was exploring these questions as a writer and partly as a ritualist. But I began more and more being interested in also exploring them as a permaculturalist. And I think it was in 1997 I took a permaculture design course with Penny Livingston Stark. And then a few years later, there was a big blockade in Seattle against the World Trade Organization. And both Penny and I were there. It was a galvanizing political moment, and we kind of came out of it saying, I know all these young activists now that are just on fire with wanting to change the world, but don't necessarily know what they want to change it into. And I know all these permaculture people and builders and natural builders and eco, community people and all these people with these incredible solutions, but sometimes they seem a little bit naive about the power structures that are in the way. What if we could bring this together? So we started something called Earth Activist Training that teaches permaculture design with a focus on organizing and activism and with a grounding in spirituality. And that's how I ended up at our eco-village, teaching that because Brandy asked me to come up there at some point. So that's, I guess, a little bit about who I am.
So my name is Brandy Gallagher, and I live and work and love and laugh at our eco-village, which is about 45 minutes from here, and it's a 25-acre sustainable living demonstration site and education center. And it is kind of hard to just talk without saying we, because you can't really live village or go village and think of an individual aspect of something. And I suppose that's the underlying impulse with permaculture regardless, is that everything is interconnected. But I would say that what brought me to our eco-village, and maybe even tonight and this conversation, is kind of a strange background to some people. I feel like I've kind of come in on a different trajectory, perhaps. But I had the great privilege. When I was younger, people thought it was a great neglect or something. But the interesting opportunity of having grown up in what was once deep wilderness. And I grew up in the wilds, and now people are trying to rewild. But in those days, I actually didn't know that there was anything so much else until I was about 6 years old, which was the first time I went to Vancouver and saw a city and realized there's a lot of people in the world. And I grew up on one of those good old-fashioned commune places in the 60s, and my parents pioneered 400 acres of wilderness, and were kind of hiding out. They were conscientious objector types, and it was a great place to have draft dodgers hide out. And I always said that growing up in the wilderness, you met all the crazies, all the visionaries, all the alkies, and or a combination of a little bit of both. But I was highly impacted by those people, because you have to be a grand adventurer to move out into the middle of the wilderness. And I was raised by a mother who was raised by nuns in the Catholic Church. And she had never really lived outside of a convent space and then moved into the wilderness. So you can only imagine how crazy it was to try and raise kids in an environment like that. But I also, in order to go to school, and our community was deeply embedded in a First Nations culture in the area that I grew up in, and I actually lived in other people's homes in order to access school. So over the years, it's come to me in this conversation about learning and permaculture. I would weave in that kind of understanding of the interconnectedness of us all is we're very influenced along the way. And when we get to look backwards in hindsight, for my life, I see just the opportunity of those incredible teachers and teachings of living a certain life and being in a certain location. And the place I grew up is a place that my mother said in 1973, "Oh my God, this place is being overrun. This is getting out of control. The people in it, and it's, you know, it's putting everything at risk." And so she up and donated the land out from underneath our community and that place, and to protect it forever and to be a wilderness park. And that place is Brandywine Falls Provincial Park. And it's an important part of kind of the way of seeing a perspective, because when you're born of the land and you carry a name that's literally after the place you're born, I understand that kind of deep roots, the indigeneity of knowing place. And there's a debt you carry when you're actually named after a place, and especially because that's quite a sacred place and historically a ceremonial peace gathering grounds. But that kind of sets you up for not really being able to live well in mainstream culture. So you can imagine coming as a young person to Vancouver Island, and my family moved here to grow food in the Cowichan Valley and live with some other families and farm 65 acres on the ocean when you used to be able to eat off the beaches still. And we grew probably 98% of our food in those days. And I think the Cowichan's down to about 3% now. And that is the kind of stories that impacts us along the way. Like, why was it so? And why is it not necessarily now? And the only thing you can do as a teenager often in response to that is just rebel. And so in my angst, I packed myself off and thought, this is crazy. Like, none of this is working so well. And I thought, I'm just going to leave all this, and I'm going to go off and I'm going to be a lawyer. That's it. I'm going to wear a three-piece suit, and I'm going to be a lawyer. And my hippie parents and all the granola wheat and all the homemade everything and the hand-spun and everything else, that's enough of that, because it's how's that ever going to make a difference in the world? I'm going to go straight into the heart of the belly of it all. And I thought, I'm going to start by working with government, and then I'm going to become a lawyer. And even my poor parents, they were like, "Oh, we tried so hard. What do we do? She wants to become a lawyer." We tried, yeah. We worked with her, but then look. So everything comes around full circle, and in the interconnections, and a big part of the journey of community and us being together is how our lives double back on themselves. And it's pretty amazing to live in a learning community and a learning center where people from all over the world come. We have about 10,000 folks per year interconnecting through our eco-village to understand how to live with the land again, and how to live with each other, and how to find a different way. And it strikes me a lot as I get older that it isn't really a different way that we're looking for. It's the pieces and the threads of the ways that have been throughout time, and that somewhere in our beings, in our DNA, we each have the village in us still, that we're each of the lineages of our own ancestral journeys that we remember. So relearning our learning as a topic tonight, it's not that far away. Somewhere 1, 2, 3 generations back in our family, those were our villagers. They knew it, they lived it, they had that interconnected life with the land and with self and each other, and all the unseen as well. So it's exciting to kind of just be with y'all again in this conversation, and with so many in the room that keep this conversation going, and so many elsewhere that we can't see on live stream. But thank you for being here, and I'm grateful to beckon this conversation forward. So part of moderating and sitting in a chair is going to be kind of fun here, but I'm going to pick your guys' brains, I think is what I'm going to do. No, I'm going to dive deep in the soul level, and let's go there, because this conversation is about relearning our learning. And it's not meant to be reinventing the wheel. There's a lot in this room, and particularly with sitting here, where we don't have to try and figure out as activists and people that have been advocating for things for so long, and really bringing stuff up out of the ground in so many ways. Like, both of you have worked long and hard and been at it in so many ways. I'm wondering if we can just start to address this. Ideas, we're supporting schools that are opening and looking at the Exploration Center, but we're here to talk about how permaculture and learning blends together. And what does that mean? And how do we recreate the world and relearn it from those perspectives? So I invite either one of you to start. What does that twig?
Well, I actually brought something to read, but it's in my book, which is in my bag, which maybe if we can get passed up, and while it's coming up, maybe Mark will think of something brilliant to say.
There's a lot of pressure on me. There's a lot of pressure on me here because Starhawk's my teacher, so I'm afraid of getting things wrong and being demoted later. Well, permaculture has emerged with intention and necessity. And I think, as I say that, I'm wanting to kind of go back and forth to compare what we've been creating as a movement and as a culture to what we've experienced in the institutions that we've had to sort of grow within, transcend, adapt to. And with all due respect to the people who practically fought and died to create public education, which I think was an intention, the best intention. Over time it's become quite institutionalized, obviously, and quite affected by all manner of pressures until I can speak especially about the United States, with all of the relentless budget cuts assaulting that system. Many schools have just become almost like detention centers, really, and holding tanks for children where they kind of live out their time until they can get out. And then you have to question the value of whatever they've managed to gather out of that. So in contrast to that, permaculture has emerged really as a community movement, and it's characterized not by sitting and just absorbing and trying to memorize things in order to regurgitate it later, but really to, I think at best, learn and then implement, and learn by doing. But also, most fundamentally, as opposed to institutional education that really is in many ways designed to align you with a hierarchical, stratified, compartmentalized society, permaculture is really designed to liberate you, activate, innervate your sensibilities, and help you actually start to see your relationship to the patterns of nature and the cycles within which we truly live. So it's not trying to make you acclimate to endure a condition and become a functional unit in a system that is unresponsive to your needs, and that is so fundamentally deceptive, but actually to challenge that. And you could also just crystallize it this way. For a long time, activism was characterized by resistance. Permaculture brings the most powerful tools that I've come upon so far to actually create a new form of activism that invites you to create the world that you want to live in now, and to inhabit it where you stand and invite other people to stand with you. So, if you're not familiar with permaculture, then we need to say more about what it consists of. But for now, I'll step back and return to Star.
Yeah, I think permaculture, I always say it's a system of ecological design that takes nature as our model to help us meet our human needs while actually regenerating the environment around us. And one way we do that is we start by observing, and then we look around at what's happening. We wrestle with what we observe. We experiment. We make mistakes, and we observe what happens and receive feedback on them and make changes. So it's a very interactive system. And I believe learning is and should be interactive. People don't learn well just by being, having knowledge poured into them. They learn by engaging with material. So I want to read you a little passage. This is from City of Refuge, which is the sequel to The Fifth Sacred Thing. And it takes place when the people in the north have managed to get the army out of their land and recover it, and they're trying to rebuild after the destruction. But they have a lot of the soldiers who've defected are still hanging around, and they're trying to figure out how to integrate them. And one of them is named River, and he's the one in The Fifth Sacred Thing who really is responsible for bringing the army over to the side of the north. So this is what happens one day as the rebuilding is going on. In the center of the garden stood a red sphere on a pedestal. "What's that?" River asked one of the older girls. "That's Mars." She looked up at him, her dark, straight hair framing an owlish face. "What's Mars?" Thick glasses hid her dark eyes. Already, she had the eyes of the Califian women, looking straight into his with no fear nor submission, as if she were a person looking at another person, one she didn't think much of. "It's our neighbor planet," she told him. "What's a planet?" She looked at him sharply as if she suspected he were joking. "We're standing on one. The Earth is a planet, like a giant ball circling the sun. Crazy shit." "It's true. How come we don't fall off then?" "Gravity holds us on." "What's gravity?" "Gravity is the Earth's love for her children, holding us close," she said, as if repeating something she'd memorized. "Hey, Tubos," River shouted to his old unit. "Come hear this." The girl called her friends over, and the children soon discovered that the soldiers knew almost nothing about the world. They had all been taught to read, write, and count, mostly for the convenience of their commanders, but they had never been given storybooks or even textbooks on anything other than weapons and the simplest of military tactics. Their entertainment came from vid screens, vid games, and failing that, cards. They didn't know that the earth turned around the sun or that compost made soil. They knew nothing of history and were unaware that California and the Southlands had once been part of the same state, one of 50 in the same country. They had rarely seen the night sky before they made the long march to the north, and it hadn't occurred to most of them to wonder what those pinpoints of light in the heavens were. Stars had to be explained to them. "Help us rebuild this learning track," the girl said, "and we'll teach you things." "That's an order?" 3-2 asked. The girl frowned. "If you want it to be, it's an offer." "An order," Rivers said firmly. The girl held out her hand. "I'm Jasmine. What's your name?" "River." He took her hand and stood looking at it, not sure what to do with it or why she extended it to him. She grasped his, pumped it vigorously, and let it drop. "These other chipsters here don't got names. Just numbers," River told her. "So what's this track thing about?" "It's how we learn here. There's different tracks that run all through the city with different learning stations. Right now we're on the solar system track, and this is the Mars station. The next one out would be Jupiter and then Saturn. It's like a giant scale model. This ball is how big Mars would be if the sun were as big as the giant model that used to be in the Central Plaza. And it's as far away as Mars would be if it were this big." River and the other soldiers just looked at her, mystified. So Jasmine explained that on the solar system track, every planet had a learning station. Mars had its sphere, and around it were gardens with herbs that belonged to Mars and flowers in martial colors, along with statues of war gods from many cultures, Ares and Chang'o and Thor. Each had a port for the intelligent crystals that the children wore around their necks. When they touched them to the ports, holograms jumped out with stories, myths, and explanations. They could listen to the Greek and Roman myths or hear the Scandinavian Eddas, and then compare them to the Marvel Comics Thor and the movies. They could watch video from the early Mars rovers or access the scientific reports from expeditions the scientists had mounted, back when people could still do such things, before the collapse. In their learning groups, they might delve further into the mysteries, space exploration, or write and perform their own Mars space opera, or read Mars-centered science fiction, or create a strategy game about a Mars expedition. So that's a little taste of it. But for me, that vision of education came out of sort of pondering the question of what would the city be like if it were designed to be a place where children were free and safe to explore and to learn, and where everything was set up to further their interactive learning, not by sitting just in a classroom, but by actually exploring and engaging and interacting with the things that they had around them. And what kind of society would we need to have where kids were free to do that?
And can you say a little bit about how maybe that just shows up now in permaculture courses? Like, what is the content of that? Because we have a design certificate that's acknowledged around the world that is being utilized with courses, and amazing teachers that are bringing this word, this impulse forward. But what's that actually mean to take to embark on a permaculture learning journey and do a design certificate?
Well, so I come from a background in architecture and planning, and I have noticed, before I kind of tangented off of that career, that there was a disassociation between that profession and the greater community, in which architects felt they were underappreciated, and the community said, well, no wonder you think you're all better than us, and you're really unhappy people, self-serious and self-important. And so I think of permaculture as being, it's rather like architecture. You design, but you're not designing objects. You're designing with life. You're designing with the intent to enhance and cultivate and help things to become more fruitful, and also to inhabit that. I love the way that permaculture has been itself cultivated, so that it's a set of tools, it's concepts, but it's processes and methods. It's actually a culture itself that you can join, that is immediately empowering. It helps you to actually walk out the door and begin to see the world in a new way, to see possibility, to see empty walls as opportunities for life to flourish, like living walls, for instance, or some vine to grow up that offers you at some point the possibility to eat something, or maybe make beer with what's growing there, and to shade a wall. It offers you so many ways of being empowered that people actually, when they leave a course, they are so excited that they might almost explode. There's so many different ideas so many different possibilities that they've learned about, that they tend to start more things than they can finish. And some of you really know what I'm talking about. So, yeah, it's, as opposed to engineering you to be a kind of a cog, it empowers you to actually creatively engage and interact with your own environment. And as an activist myself, for a while before I actually became engaged with permaculture, I found myself feeling quite lonely, and I didn't really know how to describe it even to myself, but I was looking for a culture of other people who were also kind of irrepressible, and inherently positive and mutually reinforcing, and and I was also looking for a way to seriously transform the world. Like, I'm just the only thing that really exhausts me. I mean, there's so many things that are trying and testing, but like the rest of you, there's so many things that I care about, and I want to change the world. It's so hard to wake up in the morning, like, oh no, yet again. Like there's been an increase in anxiety in the field of humanity. How can we possibly abate this? And I think permaculture enables you to not just have immediate tools to make a difference in your own life, and then inhabit that. You also it enables you to start sort of creating for yourself a big picture. But then when you're working with the other people, knowing the other people in that culture, they keep feeding each other. It's a culture of it's not perfect. There's plenty of contradictions, but I think we're able to acknowledge that, and it certainly permaculture has helped us be more receptive to each other's feedback. Certainly, so it's the culture itself, I think, that is most attractive, and I don't think I find that in educational institutions. I find the same impersonalization and alienation, the inability for people to look each other in the eye and greet each other like, "Oh, my species." You know, oh, you have thumbs too. How fantastic! Maybe we could do something together. Like, no, but in permaculture, you kind of get that. You know, that we have a whole lot more in common than we have as differences, and it enables you to have a language to start to work together and share your success stories. So I think it's really permaculture is not really separate from people. I mean, we're talking about it as a new thing, but many people understand it as a thing which we have recovered. And there's all this complexity in it. I think people of color are rightfully concerned that there might be cultural appropriation involved. But then, as this dialogue has proceeded, and descendants of Europeans, white people, start to realize that they themselves used to live in villages that were characterized by bioregional economies and behaviors, that in many ways we're also recovering our own way of being. Which was much more intimate with the world. So I think we call it permaculture, but I think it's coming back to culture itself and a more intimate relationship with the world. It's had to come as a set of principles, but it's just common sense, really. Like, I don't even know if this is a principle, but it's something that you arrive at after being a part of this. You start to see that everything has inherent value. I mean, as opposed to being taught that things only can have a single use and then you throw them away. Of course, we know that's an archaic, broken mentality. But permaculture actually it enables you to stand in the midst of a garbage dump and see that everything still has possibility and potential all around you. And of course, that doesn't just apply to stuff. You can see it in each other as well. And I think that's one of the great revelations that Starhawk has done the most work with, which is to apply these kinds of ecological, like basically nature's ecological design principles. They actually apply to us. This thing called social permaculture or social ecology takes us even deeper into understanding ourselves and how we can work with other people.
And there's something about that when we look at it. It just strikes me sitting here and listening that two of us came in through a therapeutic and therapist background of, like, how do we help? How do we work with kids and adults, and what's needed in the world right now? How does it make a difference? And that part of permaculture and learning has all the reading, writing, arithmetic, and permaculture has all the tools and technology and design methodologies. But it seems to keep coming back to who are the humans that are enacting these systems, because we could design perhaps some of the most amazing responses to climate change and ways to work through adaptation for that. And we could take on world hunger potentially. And yet, why don't we as humans, and what does it take? Where's the leverage points in the human and social ecology? And how does that show up in permaculture? And what's that look like?
Yeah, for me, I did come in also somewhere along the line there. I went back to graduate school and got a degree in psychology and was practicing as a therapist, and maybe even more than that, I'm the adult child of 2 psychotherapists. So it's back to my roots. But I do think we all actually, if we go back further, we all do have roots with ancestors, with people who lived close to nature and understood the cycles of nature, and understood how to work with them and adapt to them and respect them. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't have survived. And so we can draw on that. And permaculture does draw on indigenous wisdom, on traditional methods of farming and land use. But what it does, and I think is a little different, is it talks about how do we use these as models for designing and creating systems that can actually regenerate landscape and regenerate human culture as well as agriculture. And to me, that's the great challenge of our times. If you look at climate change, not just as a bunch of numbers about carbon, but as massive ecosystem degeneration on a global scale, then the antidote has to be massive ecosystem regeneration. And that has to go along with massive social system regeneration. And the good news is we actually know how to do that. At least on the ecosystems, we know how to do it. The social systems are a little more complicated because they involve humans, and humans are really notoriously difficult to get along with, and pig-headed and stubborn, and right. But that's where the social permaculture comes. Can we look at patterns in human behavior and group behavior? Are there things that we can observe from the natural world that also can help us to work together more effectively as human beings? Because I believe that's the limiting factor, not just in permaculture, but in everything. It's not the technology, it's the human ecology that we have to deal with. So, we could solve climate change like that, or at least we could move out of the state of the most devastating thing possibly imagining to the world and human beings is happening all around us and nobody's paying any attention to it, to, hey, people, as a world community, let's make a commitment to deal with this and do everything we can and see if we can slow it down, shift it, change it, adapt to it, and in the process, build living systems that are actually healthier, more resilient, and more fair and more just than the ones that we're letting go of. We have that capacity. Why aren't we doing it? That's the human factor, the political will, the social factor, and that's the key thing that I think we have to address.
I could say a little bit more. So about affecting the social culture, that's why the organization called City Repair was conceived back in the mid-90s, and the work that we've been doing over the last more than 20 years is strongly guided by the urban application of permaculture, and we've got strategies, we've got certain calculated gambles, and we're well advised by indigenous people that we've asked for help in enacting this project to basically confront colonial structures of domination and control that we think are the basis of unsustainable society. And it's not that any indigenous culture would claim to be perfect. We don't pretend and romanticize any particular culture, but the bet is that people who live within a kind of a bioregional sensibility and who understand that they have to live within constraints, and also, frankly, who have guiding mythologies that are worshipful and see the world as sacred, have a hell of a better chance than we do. So we pay attention to those still instructive lessons in societies, many of whom are still alive, and much of which we've discovered through the study of through archaeology, anthropology, sociology, whatever those disciplines have been able to bring us that we can work with about understanding ourselves. So this is basically the approach of City Repair. Okay, we understand that we're unsustainable, and if you look around and you see that we're in a colonial grid, and you look a little bit deeper, and you learn things like, wow, gosh, we really are laid out on paper, aren't we? Like entire neighborhoods, generated for profit by developers, missing almost all of the cultural fabric that our ancestors used to generate out of their own participatory cultures. Geomorphic societies, geomorphic urban structures that were designed out of, are basically place coming out of the ground, where people adapt to the wind and the light and express their stories through the fabric that they create that supports their lives, and very much thinking about the past and very much anticipating the future. I'm talking about our own cultural traditions. So City Repair says, okay, at some point our cultures were disrupted, and there's been a whole big mess since then. We're profoundly confused and at least half crazy at this point. Why don't we try to go back to a point and look at our behaviors and how we laid out our basically our villages, and try to reclaim a bit of that and elicit it within, or somehow cultivate it within the context of our isolation and see what happens. So, okay, for myself, I traveled quite a lot to visit different villages around the world, and this is what helped me so much. I basically went around asking what the hell is wrong with me, and what is wrong with my people, and the folks that I visited, from people in Egypt during Ramadan to Mayan people in Guatemala and southern Mexico, I would say, do you have an idea? Can you give me a hint about what the hell is wrong with me? And they're just like, this is the best thing ever. A white man asking for our insight on what the fuck is wrong with you, brother. Yeah, it was amazing. So I got to hear over and over again about cultural disruption and colonization. And the most beautiful thing was this one time when I was sobbing and I was crying and I was apologizing, I'm so sorry for what has happened. I'm so sorry for what we did, and just trying to own as much as I could. And this beautiful man comes up and holds my face in his hands, and he says, "You guys," meaning us, "cannot take this upon yourselves." And I said, "What?" And when I say this, I am not absolving us. But he said this in the most incredible expression of empathy. He said, "You only did this because it was done to you so long ago. You don't even know who you are. You don't even know your own story. So how can you possibly know what to do in the world when you're not connected to that story? You need to go back and understand, when did these long, straight, flat lines of colonialism, when did this commodification of all that is sacred descend upon your people and turn you into the kind of people who would go out and murderously steal and rape and destroy and not even want to talk about it afterwards? Something has happened to you, and it swept you up, and it made you do it to us. But at least we know who we are, because it happened recently enough for us to know the story." So I went around asking, what the hell is wrong with me? And those are the kinds of responses I got. And when I came back, I stood in these street intersections, and I saw the long, straight, flat lines that are just as long and straight and flat in Victoria, BC, as they are in Los Angeles, San Diego, Chicago, St. Louis, Portland, Beaverton, Oregon, all across the entire North American continent. So I was like, haha, this is basically a big freaking joke in some ways. Even though we villagers inhabit it and we built it, we never imagined this kind of dystopic outcome. So let's see what would happen if we built a true, non-dogmatic community meeting house. Would people respond like a bird responds to being in a nest after being told that they can't even fly? Or like a fox somehow responds to a den after its whole life searching for a sense of place. Yeah, we built a community meeting house, and boom, so many people came to it. And they got so excited, they shift their energy out into an intersection and turned it into the community crossroads that their ancestors used to enjoy as the heart of the village. Suddenly, we had inoculated the colonial grid of isolation with a little bit of Neolithic misbehavior, and suddenly we started to walk like a giant village, tripping quite a lot and falling over, but getting bigger and stronger all the time. So our strategy to answer your question around, somehow addressing larger social issues was to address our own dysfunction through trying to alter our habitat through participation so that we would start to feel the power and the possibility that we could take to larger and larger scales to affect other cities and even other countries. So I can tell you, the other day, the state of Oregon, passed a tiny home building code because of all the work we've been doing with homeless people. Like maybe the bet that we made with ourselves that has been the most successful is kind of like this Jedi mind trick. Like when we broke laws and then bureaucrats were like, you can't do that. We were like, instead of fighting with them over power, we were like, your own neighborhood is missing a public square. And they're like, oh, that's true. We need one too, And where else are you going to put it except in public space where it belongs? So, yeah, we've been working with people as people, and instead of like, oh yes, we're merely the community and you're the authority, we've been relating to people directly and affirming their dignity when we know full well in the city government that they feel frustrated and their lives are repetitious and mind-numbing and heart-numbing. Instead, we've been bringing this whole other sort of joyous, creative insurrection that everyone can join in on. We figure that's going to help us make a lot, very, very different decisions as individuals and as a group.
Well, let's tease this for a minute because the stories and how this is unfolding and how this is weaving can be brought back around to if we're imagining this for our next generation. So this is the work that describes decades and decades, and building off of all the decades before and the ancestral journeys of before. And when we talk about relearning our learning, it's the timing now to ask, what do these children need that are coming next? All that this conversation brings, if you could imagine a space or ways or possibilities that lend into that learning of what is being called for now, what is permaculture and education. In any design we might even contrive and take the lid off the box totally. Do you want to throw in a little bit about what could we dream?
Get rid of the homework. I don't know if this is as true in Canada as it is in the United States, but there's been this move over the last decades to add more and more and more and more homework all the time. So kids that go to public school come home and every house becomes a battleground of getting your 8-year-olds to do 2-3 hours of homework after they've already spent hours and hours in school. And that means you don't have time for family time. You feel guilty asking them to do the dishes on top of their mathematics and their and so they don't get to do real stuff. When I was a kid, child rearing was kind of like, kid, it's a beautiful day outside. Go outside, play, right? Come back when the street lights go on. Yeah, right. We had some extracurricular activities, Hebrew school and ballet if you were middle class, but that was sort of it. Most of the time you spent running around the neighborhood with other kids. Now kids don't get to do that. And you did that when you were 6 years old, Now you let your 6-year-old go out and play. You'd have child protective authorities after you in the U.S. It's really scary there. And I think kids need that. They need a lot of unstructured time. They need to learn to do real stuff. They need to do things like garden and dig in the dirt and build forts in trees and catch frogs and ride their bikes, and play handball in the garage and annoy all the neighbors, that, right? And they need to be in nature. And so many kids don't get a chance to be outside, let alone in the natural world. They need that kind of deep connection with nature. in order to know who they are. And I think when they get that, they're wonderful and they're amazing. And when they don't get that, I think they're deeply, deeply distressed. And they end up in this day and age getting addicted to screens and growing up online and not, having human interactions. And it makes it really difficult for them to know how to behave, how to do anything, how to commit to anything, how to create anything. So I'd love to see kids encouraged to be wilder, to be less controlled, to explore and interact and make mistakes and try things out and figure things out on their own, and have teachers and parents and learning guides there as support, but really let the directive come from the kids.
It's almost like reclaiming the word homework.
Yeah.
That we could go home into the natural spaces, and homework could be not outsourcing our lives to teachers that are going to plug and play us, and all the ways that we've given over our lives to others, kind of contriving it, so we're just left with factory learning perhaps, but bringing it on home.
And Finland, which has like the highest whatever scores for anything, has no homework. They don't allow homework. They have shorter school hours and days and school years. They're very much about, no, kids need time to be unstructured. They need time to play because that's actually integral to how they learn.
We're in the midst of a permaculture design course, Earth Activist training at our eco-village. And we have a little Permi people's camp side by side. So it's children and families and permaculture and learning. And to see the day unfold where it's really about learning how to create shelter. In the case of this week, it's building a chicken tractor, and how to grow food, and how to create your own little micro enterprise, and how to live a rhythm in the day. And how come that's not a right? How come that's not just the justice or the just us being able to craft our learning?
And the kids are having such a good time. And they think that, like every day we do a gratitude circle there before every meal where someone says what they're grateful for. And this one little girl always says, I'm grateful for school. And I always think, that's so unusual.
Do you want to wrap this and we can turn it over to some questions?
Well, I would just agree with you. But what we're talking about reminds me that as I was digging into the origins of the idea that children are removed from home in order to be educated, I found that it took me, I studied a lot about colonizing cultures. And as far back as I needed to go was to discover that in ancient Sparta, you would remove the boys. Girls were allowed to stay home, but you would remove the boys at the age of 6, and then after that they went through the most horrific conditioning program, most violent, dehumanizing, intentionally dehumanizing program, after which they got to vote. They got to be a participating citizen. After they'd, actually, in order to go on to be able to vote, you had to kill someone. So things have softened a little bit since then. But the idea that you take your children away from their true mentors and from their place to go elsewhere and learn, in the USA, somebody in Texas decides what goes into our textbooks. It's all decided and manufactured there and then distributed to the rest of the country. Was there ever a group of mothers that decided that was a good idea, that their children should go away from them? I mean, what we know for sure is that that creates generational gaps. People grow separately; they don't grow together. When you send, parents away to do these repetitious tasks in order to earn money to leave the home zone, to go to the work zone to pay for the money, to gather the money to pay for your life in the home zone that you barely get to inhabit, and the family is fractured at the beginning of every day and then comes home at the end of every day with dissimilar experiences, it automatically creates fissures in the family. Whoever volunteered for that? So as opposed to that, to verify what you just said, one of these cultures that I went around to visit, the Lacandon Maya, it's still almost too beautiful for me to even remember what it was like to interact with their children, whose eyes were so bright and whose knowledge of their immediate environment was so intimate and so strong. I could ask them any question about the function of an insect, its symbolic meaning. Like one time I said to this one child, "So what's this one? What does this one do?" And he said, "It's beautiful that you ask, because when that insect hatches, like, we know that it's time to harvest our corn." And we either know it because of that insect or a certain plant that insect immediately goes for and bites the stem of, and then it folds over. And if we see it, like the first stem we see, we let the rest of the village know that the time has come. I had so many conversations with the kids and their families, and I watched them interacting. I saw people were healthier in every way. I saw children crack jokes and their fathers just fall on the ground, unthreatened by the humor of their children, laughing uproariously, like at yet again probably the same penis power joke that the kid, this Mayan, that's one of the words I learned, penis power, in Mayan. I watched these kids. I was camping not far from the village because they keep the internationals down by the lake where the alligators are. But they would come running down the trail with these gigantic ultramarine iridescent blue glow bugs wrapped in their hair all over their heads, and they would come running, giggling down the trail, and I would see their little skulls running down the trail as they were giggling, and I was like, jaguars around here, but their moms are letting them out to run around with the glow bugs. And I was like, okay, you guys are hippies. You came here in the 60s. This can't be real. Yeah. And yet it was real. They had been an intergenerational, interconnected, interdependent community with not a corrupted mythology, like we belong here, we are of the earth, we are inseparable from nature. What's it like to grow up with that kind of perspective? Well, I got to see that. Stronger, more healthy, physically more healthy, more fearless than we typically are. So I can definitely can confirm what you were just saying with my own eyes.
Ooh, there's a vision. There's some possibilities. Thank you. Do we want to hand it over to some questions? Which means you can grab a microphone, and it is out there somewhere. Yep.
Thanks. It's Will. I have not so much of a question, but something that resonated for me as a kind of a surprise thought as I listened to you speak. In the world of art, there is a movement called relational aesthetics that steps away from the idea that the art object itself, the artifact, is the thing of beauty. In this idea, it's that the art serves to engender relationship between the viewer and an idea or other people or place. And that's what the purpose is. Now, it winds up being a thing of beauty. Sometimes it's quite simple, but the purpose is, how can this thing engender this relationship and this connection? And it seems to me that that's quite a lot of what you're talking about. The work that you do in the village and the works that you're all doing wind up being beautiful, but really the intention is not to craft this thing of beauty. It's to create a place, a jumping off place that builds this. And I just saw those two things connected in a way I'd never seen before. So thank you for that.
First off, thank you so much for sharing your stories tonight. So my question goes to all three of you. If you were given a raw piece of land to build a new village and a learning center from scratch, what would be the most important place to start, and what red flags would you say to watch out for in the first year to 2 years of building your village? And you can answer that in 60 seconds or less.
Are you asking that to each of us?
The question goes to whoever wants to answer, because y'all got a lot to share. So I'll be writing the book back here, transcribing. It'll be published at the end of the night.
I want to go for the things to watch out for. I think the two strongest skill sets that came forward as the real opportunity to create our eco-village wasn't what people imagine with the legal and the regulatory and the political and all that brought together. It was two things. And one was outrageous optimism, like throw it to the North Star and that's where we're going and that's it. And the second part of that, and they kind of have to go hand in hand in our mind, is an extreme level of naivety. And so as an asset, it means that on the way to the North Star, you don't see all the tripping hazards along the way. And perhaps because your question had the, what do you look out for? Look out for the people that try and take those two away. All the places that says you can't and no, and the tagline from our eco-village is no is just an uneducated yes. So anywhere that you're asked for overt business plans and things that appear like, why are you doing this, and we're not going to help, and you can't afford it, and no, that's the stuff to look out for, and just keep going.
I guess if I had a piece of land someone gave me to build an eco-village, I would use it for the project that I'm hoping to really get into next, which is starting long-term training centers for massive, large-scale land regeneration, because I think that's what we need to do, and training people to be able to be prepared to go onto land. And something like half the farmland in the U.S. and Canada is due to change hands in the next 20 years. And I think it's vital for the fate of the world that that land be put into regenerative carbon ranching and carbon farming purposes. So training the people to be able to do that, and then finding a way to network and make land available for young people who want to get on and really work it and have the skills to do it. And what I watch out for, you've got to figure out early on how you're going to handle conflict, because every group has it. And if you don't learn how to deal with conflict well, it'll destroy what you're doing. If you do learn how to deal with it well, then you can be resilient and you can deal with, it's a lot easier to deal with the conflict that comes at you from outside the group than it is from the conflict that happens within the group. So that's what I'd watch out for.
So I'm imagining that you're planning on doing diligence so that you are sure to match up the land with your intention, so that you don't find yourself having committed precious resources to something that legalistically you can't use. Because even if you move ahead in that case, and you're just sure that you won't be caught advancing this idea, it's quite possible. Phased approach. You are not taking on more than you can handle. You definitely don't want to exhaust your people and your resources trying to build out a whole thing that you can barely, you barely have the energy and the people to really inhabit. So, guided by permaculture, you want to start and ensure that you have enough energy left over and excitement to keep going, that you're rewarded for your efforts, so that after all of this work that you've done, that you get a lot back that builds you for the next round of what you're going to undertake. So I'm figuring you're going to create a bunch of multi-use spaces that you can use in a lot of different ways at first. You'll want to put in alternative systems, but you're probably going to be compelled by the municipality to put in conventional ones first. I don't know, but I'm also betting that you're going to try to get away with, putting in alternative systems anyway. You just have to be really smart about how you do all of that and make best use of your resources. And everything that you do, I would advise, you use as an opportunity to build community. And not just internally, but the partnership culture around you that you're ultimately going to want to affect. You might as well be affecting them from the start so that they're aware of what you're doing and they're on board and they want to support you.
Hi, hello. I'm wondering, what tools do you use for yourselves to stay inspired, to keep your own personal momentum going and to do the things that you do? And I'm just curious if you have a technique that you have for yourself to stay so inspired.
I almost want to suggest you start first, Mark, because of what just happened in your life lately.
Well, that's my first answer. So I recommend that you all have a baby. Now we just had one, and that's our plan, because we really are serious about not contributing to the population challenge, and being part of a voluntary reduction strategy. That said, man, once you have one, and it's so fun, you kind of like, let's make another one. This is so great. Yeah, we have this little daughter. She's 12 weeks old. Her name is Esther Plum, and she is so dear. I can't stop just thinking about her and my sweet wife and missing them. But yeah, that's definitely perpetually motivating, inspiring. When she was born, I was like looking at Donald Trump and all his foolish plans, and I was like, you are nothing. You are toast. You are such a punk. Like, as a father, I am totally empowered to stand up to you and, transcend your bullshit and make sure the world is safe for this little girl. And that's a really powerful sentiment. It's just like a fire right now. And that little fire was burning before, but now it's just a blaze. So that's a motivator. But, so we work with people and children. We work with intergenerational communities. We work with beauty and love. We're always sitting down together with food. We come to people, with people, not as teachers of, but like people with. And that just creates all these self-sustaining feedback loops. So that's what really sustains me, just constant learning and growth.
For me, I think connection to nature is one place that always renews my inspiration and, my sense of hope and optimism, and connection to community. And, I also have been teaching people for 30, 40 years now, magical tools and tools for grounding and for staying centered and for shifting consciousness and for not getting caught up in your overwhelming emotions. So using those tools actually works. They actually help, right? Who knew?
I would say two things. I would say that in the days of disposable everything, including disposable relationships, that long-term relationships are something that keeps the fuel. And somebody commented after we were all sitting around the table last night, and everybody left, and Graceland came up and said, wow, there's just something about having that long-standing connection or caring so deeply that there's something magical about being in conversations like that where it matters for so long and you don't get burnt out or dried up or jaded or go away or give it all up. but you stay in and you stay in together. So that long-termness of it all. And I also think that seeing the possibility of change and believing in it means really being in for the moments when people are making those huge shifts, and to stick with each other, like no matter how tough the going gets. I often say, especially in the middle of permaculture courses, that part was worth the price of admission for me. And it's about being there in that change process when there's a breakthrough. And I am so inspired, mostly by watching young children and young adults suddenly open and come alive to the possibility of something. And I don't think I could ever really get old or not be inspired just by being around, seeing that magic in their eyes. Yeah.
Thank you so much for making the trip down to Victoria to come and chat with us. I'm part of a group of folks in Victoria we're working on a new community garden in the city. And I'm wondering if you can suggest some favorite tools that you've used in the past to encourage folks who have real concern about the project happening. What tools would you encourage to be used to sort of shift them from the no, I don't want this to happen, to the yeah, this is a fantastic idea?
Pitchforks linked to mine, but that's
Pizza ovens and co-creating food. Potlucks with tons of yummy good food. I think there's also creative visioning that can come to, and I also think going to places and looking at all of what's already happening and making something real, and not just being in the conversation about it happening, but look at places where it does happen or is already something's going on. That inspires people, I think, when it's made real and it's manifest and there's something. I was just at EcoSense last Friday in the Highlands, and somewhere halfway through the time I was like, oh, I love seeing them and I love the annual pilgrimage and it's all great, but I want to go home and just plant right now. Yeah, getting it real.
Yeah, also maybe if there's a way to talk to people and actually sort of find out what their fears are. Like, what is the block about? And then see if there's a way you can address those fears.
Yeah, I think that's the first thing that you do, is ensure that they understand that you're hearing them. And, don't challenge, don't defend, don't react. Just give them all the space they need to be quite sure that they've been heard. And that doesn't mean that you will end up stopping your project or doing what they particularly say, but I think it goes a long way toward setting up an ongoing relationship with them, and it helps them sort of de-escalate. So sometimes it actually works to bring people along, and at the same time you learn, and there do frequently end up being things that you can incorporate into your design. And if they see that you are creatively responding and incorporating concerns, then they will very likely end up being a supporter. So there's a lot of things that can possibly come of it. I mean, there's maybe ways that you'll modify your design to help them feel like it will be monitored more often, or maintained more frequently, or like maybe they're worried that it looks like a blight in the winter, and so you'll when you hear that, you can assure them that you'll kind of make the beds look tidy, and you'll mulch them properly or something. Or you'll set up a perennial edge or an evergreen edge or something to make the perimeter look more tidy if that's their concern. Chances are they're concerned about attracting homeless people there. And so, I think one thing that I do, I start off with, is I hear them in terms of, I hear that they're trying to defend their village in a way. Like, the only way that most people know that change happens is in terms of like gentrification. It's visited upon us. We don't know the story suddenly changes are manifest. And so that's their conditioning around change. And then suddenly along comes this beneficial idea that would actually truly uplift the community and make it a better place and address all these issues that frankly these people you're talking about are not in touch with. They may not be paying attention, or they might be watching some corporate news station that distorts their picture of reality. So they aren't thinking about climate change and food security, and you know that it's vital, and you're doing it for them. So, I guess at a certain point you have to choose, like, who will establish the common numerator of this situation? Will it be people who are coming from a place of fear? Will it be people coming from a place of hope? But before you have to make that choice, there's a lot that you can do just simply by listening and trying to figure out ways to interact with them and offering them a chance. When it comes to fears of homelessness, homeless people, I have lots of stories that I can share with people. Like in my own neighborhood, we had a similar situation, creating a gigantic food forest, and people in condominiums across the railroad tracks reacting, saying things like, we can't have a bench here. Someone will, literally said, you're going to put in a bench, you fools, don't you realize someone will sit there? Like, I'm concerned about people who talk like that. It's like, wow, we have fallen so far. Like another person in the gathering said, you mean you would rather have us, there's not a single bench in the neighborhood, and you'd rather have nowhere for anyone to sit any time than potentially a homeless person to come along? And they said, yeah, go back to your house. So at that point, I'm still trying to be respectful of that person, but they're not going to affect us to a certain extent. But getting back to this thing about defending the village, I think it's really important to honor this impulse to defend their place. And if you can take that energy and hold it and work with it and respect them, like they may be trying to get you to react instinctively. They're trying to do that because then they'll win. If they can turn it into a fight, then they'll win, because that's where they can thrive. But there's something that happens when you still have this tone of mutual regard, even when they're coming at you in that way, and it leads you to new creative solutions and more receptivity on their part. But I don't know what to say, really. It's at a certain point when people are so out of touch. Like homeless people walking around our environment, it turns out that most of them are from our very neighborhoods. They are our own children. In some way, we haven't attended them, or we've failed them in the educational process or something. Economic disparities, what have you. In my own neighborhood, the local homeless person, the boogeyman, turned out to be a 7-year-old boy whose parents had been killed in a car accident. And he had been living in those blackberry bushes since he was 7 off of the garbage of the rest of us. And we didn't know it until he was 65. And once I discovered that, I got involved in homelessness as a cause. But most people don't know those stories. It would help them to know a story like that. Maybe they would want to create benches for homeless people. I'm going on a bit long here, but the last thing I'll say about benches is that, to me, the ultimate cause related to benches is that nursing mothers walk around looking for a place to sit in order to just take rest and nurse the next generation of our species. And to our shame, they often end up in toilet stalls because that's the only place they can find to sit. And I think that is shame upon us all. And when I think about that, I'm sorry. We're creating the community bench. We're creating the community garden with benches, and we'll just see what happens. You can agree to take out the bench later, but you're going to put it in at least in the beginning.
Thank you so much.
That was a lot to chew on. Please give a giant round for all of our guests. Wow. We only have a few minutes left together. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to know what you guys are up to right now in your worlds, just briefly, and how we might contribute and reinforce what you're up to, and tune in to what you're doing now. Yeah. Do you want to start?
let's see. Well, we've just created a new headquarters in Portland that is itself a permaculture demonstration project. Finally, we have a permanent place after being gentrified out of about 8 or 10 places in a row. That's fun. We're doing a lot of work around homeless villages. We're designing 10 at once in San Jose, California, several other individual villages in different other cities. State of Oregon has just, God, the snowball got rolling and all these people picked it up, and now they're turning it into new legislation to let everybody create such villages at our statewide level. So that's wonderful. We're designing parks. We're designing a park, a permaculture park for the indigenous community in Prince Rupert at the northern extent of British Columbia. Very participatory process. So the park will really be a reflection of their knowledge and their experience and their goals. And the mayor of the town is a transition town activist, permaculturist. So they're really very serious about this project. So those are a few of the things we're working on. A lot of public space, a lot of community work with Native people.
People find out more where?
You can find out more about that at cityrepair.org and communitecture.net. And if you don't see what you're looking for, none of it's terribly updated, so we can send you stuff if you like.
So I'm teaching a lot of permaculture this year through Earth Activist Training, which is our program that brings together the permaculture design, spirituality, and activism. We have been offering diversity scholarships for the last 4 or 5 years for people of color and indigenous people, and for our programs back home in the States, and it's made an enormous difference in who gets to be exposed to permaculture, who gets to take permaculture, and who carries it on and steps into leadership. I think it's had a huge impact on diversifying the movement. But this year we've lost the grant that allowed us to do that. It's the way funders seem to operate. It's like, oh, well, we funded you for 3 years. You've been doing great work. It's so successful. Now we're going to go fund somebody else, right? So we need to raise money. So if people want to go to earthactivisttraining.org and donate for our diversity scholarships, that would be wonderful, because I really am committed to carrying on this program. Not this year, but the year before, we were able to bring 4 deaf students for the first time and hire interpreters. It was an incredible experience for everybody who was there and who was involved, and learned so much about access and about the challenges in the deaf community. But it's enormously expensive to do that, so we'd love to be able to do that again. You can find out what I'm doing at earthactivisttraining.org or starhawk.org. I'm also working with a group through the International Permaculture Convergence process around climate change and how we get the permaculture solutions to be out there and more prevalent. And as part of that, we are just starting now the process of developing a long-term training program in carbon sequestering farming and ranching. So.
I think at our eco-village, we just keep doing what we keep doing. And this year is really a hallmark year for us of grounding in with all of our new hearthkeepers and long-term co-op members. And some of us have been connected and together on this journey for decades. So that's getting time to really be loved into the space right now. But our permaculture design earth activist training has expanded itself to be also an option of a whole full month, because we've stepped up to teach the Eco-Village Design Certificate. It's the United Nations ratified curriculum for looking at sustainable community design. We're doing something else really cool in July. We're working with a new company that's taken on the National Building Code, and we are building a hemp lime block office at our Eco-Village, and it's like big Lego blocks, building blocks for big kid builders. So we have engineers and building inspectors and all kinds of all the tech people and the regulatory folks teaching in that in July. And in August, we herald in something that's been a kind of a building conversation, and we gave it a name and called it the Re-Story Gathering. And it's about remembering and reclaiming. And it's not necessarily about the new story and throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's about taking the best of all that's been and the best of the old ways and carrying it forward into the new unknowns. And so we invite you in August to come and gather and be part of that collective conversation. And it started out a lot of dialogue with Charles Eisenstein last year, and sort of the players that have been working around the world on story and where is that going to change to. And there's lots of people in the room that are helping co-create that. So many more in all. Thank you.
I should also say that The Fifth Sacred Thing is now available as an audiobook. And City of Refuge that I was reading from is also out there in the world. We did a Kickstarter campaign. Jason helped advise me on it, and it was the second highest funded fiction project ever on Kickstarter at the time. And I've got, like, I don't know, a whole lot of other books. So if you go to starhawk.org, you can find them all there and all the places to get them. And you can get them many, many places online, or get books. Even better yet, get your independent bookstore to order them.
I have one last plug. This is the biggest thing that's going on for me, and I didn't think of it first. We have a citywide barn raising that happens at the beginning of June. It's in its 17th year, and it's called the Village Building Convergence, and it's basically an urban permaculture and placemaking festival. And it goes from June 2nd to the 11th, so it's 10 days. And there are close to 40 projects happening all across the city at the same time, 40 different communities working on them. And so there's lots of things happening both day and night. And it's really, if you come there, it's a way of decolonizing in a whole new way, like to spend time working, playing, creating, celebrating with the same sort of spectrum of people. So it's more of a full spectrum experience of being with a community, but a community in action, taking streets, turning them into public squares, lots of permaculture installations. So I invite you all to come to that if you can.
So just to bridge it back to you, our eco-village is also offering in perks there to join our permaculture design certificate course with all of these conversations, and that's available through. There's one left. There's also Permy Kids Camp ones as well, and a whole bunch of other juicy things. So, and retreat time in the village and a healing sanctuary. But it's more to say there's a lot more permaculture coming up and opportune, and it also means bridging it to the Exploration Center and offering it in with the kids there as well. So maybe you'll tell us the last piece about that.
Nice bridging. I'll say this first. I certainly have the experience of like the polarities that are in our world more than I'm used to in the last little while. And I notice how, for sake of simplicity, I'll say like the darkness pulls for the light. And I know more people who are more deeply activated right now doing deep, contributive, powerful work than I've seen in a long time also. I know younger people more deeply involved. We had the biggest PDC in Canadian history at Eco-Village last year. Did you beat it this year, or are we still? No. Anyways, it's the conversations are all growing. And I just, inside of the conversation and hearing you guys speak today, I'm just reminded of like how entirely, deeply grateful I am for the deep commitment you bring to your work. Collectively, the three of you are just mind-bogglingly epic. And I pray that you may replicate yourselves many times over, because I'm clear that we need that. And I I hope that we all play a role in that. And so to you, I say, please do look to seek, how to contribute to our friends here. I've had enough conversations with each of them to know that inside of all of their successes, there is struggle and there is resistance and rub and friction. And we can play a bigger role than we think in forwarding their work, which forwards our world. I hope you'll take the time to look up their work and follow some of those links. The video from tonight will be available, and I'll make sure all of those are available, and you can hit me up anytime, and I'll make sure you have that information. Before I jump back to Exploration Center, which I'm going to do in a second, I just want to give them a huge collective, again, gratitude. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We had a few other requests to be on this panel after we had put the thing in motion, and I was like, each one of these guys could talk for weeks, and so I must decline. So we're launching a new school in Vancouver Island, which is called Exploration Center, and it is very much inside of, the context that you've shared today. It is a nature-based, love-based, inquiry-based, whole systems thinking education model, the likes of which we have not seen in this area. And it has come out of Philip Moore's work leading a school in Michigan called Upland Hills for the last 42 years, who was mentored by Buckminster Fuller. And for anybody that's been following the campaign, we've been acknowledged by Deepak Chopra and Dr. Shefali and a whole bunch of people that have been really, really excited. And Gene Houston and Ram Dass have gotten behind the Upland Hills School and have acknowledged Phil for his work. And now that legacy is showing up here. And the reason why it's showing up here is because somebody here said, the education system that's available to my family doesn't work for me. I'm not aligned with this. It's not quite it. It's not that it's like horribly broken. And British Columbia is gifted with some amazing schools compared to many places. But it wasn't quite it. And he's a humble fellow who doesn't like the microphone and the lights and the cameras. And I have dragged him to speak to you. So please welcome Gordy Ball.
I feel like if I say penis power, it's all okay. Hi, I'm Gordy Bao, and I'm a local entrepreneur. We run a company called Conscious Thought Revolution, and our mission is to shift human consciousness. And firstly, I just want to say thanks to Jason and these beautiful souls for having a deeply conscious conversation tonight about learning the way we learn in education. And I just want to share a little bit about myself. I've spent the last 10 plus years exploring the nature of reality and have discovered that we live in a world where there's a lot of systems that disempower us and don't empower us. Whether that's media, education, healthcare, food system, banking, they're all there to disempower us. And what I realized is the minute that we're born, we're programmed. We're programmed by these systems and by the culture, by our parents, and by the education system. And throughout my journey, what I've realized is there's actually a way to deprogram ourselves. And the key to that is being with nature. Nature is a way that disrupts that programming that's there. And so I wanted to break the pattern for my own family and my own children. And so when I was looking for ways that they could be educated and honored for the true stardust beings that they are, what would that look like? And that's when Phil Moore showed up in my life and has shown me what a love-based education is really about. And so that's what we're building here. And today is I think 3 hours left we have for the crowdfunding campaign. We set off to raise $100,000. We've raised over $150,000. And and so what I'd like to ask of everybody here, hi Peter, is it doesn't matter how much you contribute to this, but I would like to ask you to contribute some form of energy. because we're all here in this room for a reason. So even if that's $1 or if it's just sharing it with your people, put your heart energy into it, because this is not about each of us. This is about the collective dream that we're tapping into. So please join us, and let's change the education system and the world.
That was the best I've ever seen you do. Bravo, sir. Just sweat. Our website is XPLORATION2017.com without the E, Exploration. It's like the street version or something. Gordy has a much better version of why the X, but that's all I got. I think that's it. I really appreciate your time and your presence, your interest in conversations like this one. And I've made my request about getting behind these folks, and Gordy has made his request about Exploration Center and Exploration2017.com. The school launches this fall. We do have a lot of, our campaign ends in less than 3 hours for the launch campaign, but the project has just begun. And so the next 6 months and years, you'll be hearing a lot about Exploration Center and centers. Gordy, again, in his Society of Humility, skips that. The intention is to build a scalable, replicable model and gift it to the world and say, here's how to do it. Let us know how to help. And we have plenty of inquiries coming inward already, asking for our help to do that. And we're like, well, let us build one first, and then we'll totally tell you how we did it. And give us some time to wet our feet, as it were. We have this room for another 29 minutes, so please connect and say hi. Oh, I said 29, I meant 19. Oh, thank you. Money, right. I'm going to grab that in a second. So pay what you can. So I do want to touch on this. Thanks. I'm going to pass the hat around. Please contribute what you can. My request is, we're all at different levels of means. And so if I want you to contribute something that feels great for you and feels inside of your capacity. If the person next to you puts in $20 and that doesn't work for you, don't do that, and don't feel any strain about that. The whole intention around that value balance is that you feel that it works for you and fits inside your world. And having said that, I want to acknowledge that Star and Mark have taken a lot of time out of their world and away from new babies and traveling and to be with us and to share in hopes that it does forward the world and forward our work inside of these contexts. So if you're in a position to contribute to them that way, please do. As you have with our attention, let us do that with some resources as well. I was setting up microphones and didn't get a basket, so I'm going to grab that right now. And I think that's it. So closing words, go.
Okay, well, I'm totally not nervous, and I'm not uncomfortable speaking in public, and yet they say that North Americans are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death. And, you might be like, oh, no, don't be trying to convince me to be a public speaker, like, oh, yeah, it's going to make me a healthier person. No, but I've been to these native places and seen that it's not a big deal to stand up in front of your community and witness. There's this knowing that we know idea. Also we kind of thing. Like when a person I've seen young people stand up and say in front of their community, it's been my honor to speak with you, to dance with you for these last 3 days and nights. I'm in love with you. I'm the son of this community. I will perpetuate our cause and our tribe, that sort of thing. And everyone around them is like, yeah. And the person who's standing there knows that they feel that way. And the people who are feeling that way are knowing exactly what that youth is saying. And that's what we've lost. We talk about what we want to do with education. I immediately think of all these problems in our community. I don't want our children to go away and learn things that are abstract and don't apply to their own lives. What really matters is that 2 houses away or 3 houses away, there is an old woman with life skills to impart. She's a true teacher, and she would love that child. I want to reconnect us. That's what I want to do. I think I want to do it because I think we want to do it. To me, it's a waste of time if only I want to do it, but I do think, I see in our eyes that we all want to do that. We want the old lady to not be alone. We want her to have a sense of community and feel safe. We also want her to know that she's part of a regenerative society because she can look into the eyes of a little girl and see that her stories and songs have been heard. And then she can let go and go back into the world knowing that there's this regenerative effect that persists through our people. So, you don't need to stand in front of people and feel completely comfortable like I think we do because we've had so much practice at it. But it is our birthright. It is our birthright to know together what we know and to really cheer each other on and look each other in the eyes when we walk down the street and know that we're part of a larger whole. So that's the cause.
I'm going to close with the story, but I'm going to maybe exemplify what you just said and tell about an experience this week. And maybe it's the learning journey for us all, but we sent our children out to go walk about from the village, and they were so held by a community and by the village cultureness around them and the songs and the bridging that they crossed out of when they went down the tunnel to depart, and we sang them out of the village, and they went for an out trip, which was really just at the back of the land, but it seemed like it must have been off into the wild blue yonder because it was scary and it was a big deal. And it was such an emotional impact to, in this day and age, create that deep sense of ceremony for our young people and to send them off in that way. And then in the morning, when they're a little bit changed, to welcome them back and to bring them back in through that same arch and a bridge and call them back into a circle and then sing them back their songs and to remind them, to remind us, to remind them, to remind each other that we're all villagers together. So thank you for this conversation and relearning our learning.
And I'll just read you a little piece from the end of the book. And this is in the voice of Maya, who's the old woman and the storyteller. For my part, if I could, I would declare a general amnesty for all of us everywhere. Forgive our debts and our mistakes, our missteps and failings and betrayals, even our occasional or devoted cruelties, all of the ways we play out our inner torment on one another. We are wounded creatures, all of us, bashing away with bloody limbs. We never had a chance to be anything else. Forgive it all and start anew. Let us forgive all the ways we wander in circles, take the wrong path. We all lose the way. Let it go and know that all you have to do, really, is just to come back. Stand up again when you fall. When you can't see ahead, grope your way back to the trail. That's all we ask, all we can ask. Not perfection, but course correction. Not a symphony, but a few notes pulled from the air and shaped into something with meaning. A song, however simple, even if you forget the words and flub the harmony, even if you think it makes no difference. Just sing. Be on the side of the makers and shapers, the singers and the storytellers. That's all you need to do. Not to sing with the voice of an angel, but however cracked and broken your instrument, sing anyway.
Good night. Good night, live stream. Thank you so much for tuning in. Many blessings.